Hello. Welcome to a roadmap for building a collaborative digital preservation network. I'm Chelsea Denault, the coordinator of the Michigan Digital Preservation Network. Before jumping in, I want to thank the NDSA Conference Committee for their work putting this event together and for giving the MDPN an opportunity to share some of our findings from our ongoing IMLS Leadership Grant. The MDPN is a collaborative, membership-based organization offering shared preservation services and a community of practice to cultural memory organizations of all types, sizes, and resource levels across Michigan. The MDPN was created with the goals of making digital preservation more accessible to small or under-resourced organizations and reducing redundant preservation efforts across the state. The MDPN is hosted by the Midwest Collaborative for Library Services, which provides shared borrowing, consulting services, e-resources, and other services to public and academic libraries in Michigan and Indiana. One housekeeping point, I'll be sharing many resources throughout this presentation. As an IMLS grant recipient, most of the resources we've created during the grant period are free and open to anyone in the community in an effort to make our findings broadly replicable for a wide range of national potential users. We encourage you to borrow from our work, as we did from other organizations. No one does this work alone. This presentation serves to share early findings and deliverables from our project demonstrating and documenting a statewide LOCKSS 2.0 preservation network for cultural memory institutions, which is supported by a national leadership grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services. This grant had several goals, which you can read in our project narrative by scanning the QR code, including recruiting several statewide partners to host the preservation network's infrastructure, working with the LOCKSS program at Stanford University Libraries to test their newly re-architectured LOCKSS 2.0 software and its related documentation, creating an easy-to-use workflow for users with limited technical skills, and documenting and sharing findings through presentations like this and our forthcoming implementation toolkit as a way to help other organizations and groups of collaborators overcome some of the early hurdles in creating their own preservation networks. Some of the findings and deliverables will be relevant to groups that intend to use the LOCKSS software for preservation, while others will be useful to those seeking to build a collaborative program of stakeholders, regardless of the technology used. Each of the following slides detailing our findings will discuss the activities we undertook as part of the grant, the partners we collaborated with, and the resources that are either available now or will be included in our forthcoming toolkit. If the resource is currently available on our website or elsewhere, I will share those links either in the Zoom chat or in the shared notes document for this session. I should also note that due to the shorter time frame for this presentation, I won't be able to cover the full breadth of the activities and resources included in the implementation toolkit, but rather I'll focus on the sort of core work that made up the IMLS project. One of the first expectations of the MDPN was to develop a path towards financial sustainability. The original 2019 Memorandum of Understanding between the Library of Michigan, the Midwest Collaborative for Library Services, and 3 universities, Grand Valley State, Michigan State, and Western Michigan University, required that the MDPN develop a, quote, financially sustainable model for organizations to participate in depending on their own institutional capacity, end quote. Developing this model in collaboration with MCLS's Group Purchasing Department and the MDPN Membership Committee was one of our first activities. The model based membership on an organization's annual operating budget in order to promote equity and accessibility for all institutions. Memberships at the lowest tier start at $100 annually and go up to $5,000 annually at the highest tier. In addition to their annual membership fee, members also pay for storage costs at the end of each membership year. In 2022, we renewed the original 3-year MOU with all of the partners, and the new agreement included a funding mechanism that reduced Library of Michigan's financial support by 30% every year over 3 years, with the intention of making the MDPN more self-sustaining on membership and storage fees over time. And finally, with support from the LOCKSS program and the Library of Michigan, we applied for an implementation grant from IMLS to help accelerate the MDPN's development. Some of the resources from this section will include a template based on the MOU that created the MDPN, our tiered membership model, which you can find on mypres.org, and our IMLS grant project narrative, which was shared in the previous slide via QR code and is included in the links for this session in the shared notes. A key goal in our IMLS grant project was to create and document a sustainable and representative member-centered governance policy that could guide the MDPN as it grew into a mature organization. This was a priority for us for two reasons. First, it was important for us to share as much decision-making authority with members as early as possible, as a way to put into practice our values of collaboration, accountability, and transparency. It was also an important way to foster deeper investment in the MDPN, its operations, and its future. MDPN Governance Committee had reviewed several of the governance models, ultimately deciding that they liked the meta-archive model, as it covered several content areas we felt were important and had been drafted in part by someone with legal experience. Over the next 4 years, the committee met monthly to refine our policy. The process took longer than most of us expected, but the multiple rounds of feedback we gathered from key stakeholders at MCLS and the Library of Michigan ultimately surfaced several questions that needed more thought, particularly the section surrounding the member-elected advisory committee, including how representatives were allocated. We decided regional representation would be most sustainable, how many people would be on the committee, 11, how they would be elected, and how vacancies would be dealt with. Finally, in May of this year, we presented a final draft of the policy to the member organizations, who voted on approving it unanimously over a 2-week period. 2 months later, we put the policy into practice for the first time, and members elected our first advisory committee. You can find our governance policy on our website, along with our code of conduct policy and reporting form. Another key grant goal was to create a workflow that would allow members to transfer content to the MDPN and then get it into each of our 5 lock servers. Before we applied for our IMLS grant, our tech committee had discussed several front-end tools for packaging and transferring files from members to the MDPN. We wanted a tool that was easily deployable to a range of member institutions, didn't require any deep command line knowledge, was easy to navigate, and would work with the lock software. My work with several AP Trust members in 2021 introduced me to Dart, which checked all of the boxes that we had hoped we would find in a tool, so our member-facing front end was set. We also had to configure Dart to make an MDPN unique profile that would set configurations for MDPN members, including creating a drop-down list of members to make source organization data more consistent and making some metadata fields required. We used member inputs from these required fields to populate the LOCKSS title database, which is an XML file that keeps a record of all of the content in the network. We also added a number of helpful hints in the metadata fields to guide users who didn't have robust archival skills or knowledge. And finally, we configured Dart to deposit content on our staging server. These configuration specifications were saved in a JSON file that we could export from Dart and share with our members via GitHub. 2 pieces that were essential before a member deposited a single thing, though, were the network's properties, or props file, and the staging server. The props file is an XML file that all of the servers in the network point to for configuration and communication purposes. And we quickly found out that there was no documented model for a LOCKSS 2.0 network's props file because there had never been a LOCKSS 2.0 network. So continued setup was put on hold while our colleagues at the LOCKSS program worked to develop a template for us. MCLS also had recently undergone a personnel change after our longtime IT manager retired. The new manager was more willing to provide technical support for the MDPN and stepped up to host the new props file and staging server for the network, and became more involved in our support calls with server hosts and the LOCKSS program. But we still needed a bridge to connect Dart and LOCKSS, as the LOCKSS software required a manifest giving the software permission to crawl the content. New content also needed to be added to the title database. Our colleagues at Western Michigan University developed a simple Python script under 350 lines that would pull the metadata added by the user in Dart to populate the title database and add the required LOCKSS manifest to the bag. It also runs a virus scan using ClamAV and a file format report using Droid. We're always making updates and improvements to this script, and I know, for example, that we have several in the works now. Once everything was in place, our tech committee then worked through the workflow several times and to ID the early pain points until we felt like we had a reliable and usable workflow for our members. Our JSON config file for Dart and our pre-process script are openly available on GitHub, and the sample props file the LOCKSS program created for us can be found in the LOCKSS 2.0 documentation. This is a diagram of our workflow. We break this down into packaging, processing, and preserving. In packaging, the user packages content according to the BagIt standard using Dart and transfers that content to the MDPN via SFTP. Once it arrives on the staging server, the processing step begins. The Python script is triggered and runs through the 4 actions below, adding the new content to the title database, validating that it has the LOCKSS manifest file, running a virus scan, and a file format report. And finally, in the preserving section, the 5 lock servers crawl staged content and begin running polls on that content with the other servers. Finally, we created documentation to share with members and the broader public to fulfill our obligations under our IMLS grant to make broadly relevant and replicable deliverables. We started by working with master's students in the University of Michigan's Information School to create a first draft of a technical guide similar to the IndyPres technical guidance document that was shared with me by my colleagues Cinda May and Justin Clark. We then, with the MDPN Technical Committee and MCLS's IT team, continued to iterate on that document until we distilled down to what guidance MDPN members needed specifically from us and what content, such as what metadata is and why it's important, already existed. What emerged was a PDF that walked users through downloading and configuring Dart, packaging and transferring their content, and how to send support requests. But a static PDF was difficult to update, and the PDF would often get lost in users' inboxes. In consultation with the LOCKSS program and the DPLA Michigan Service Hub, we developed a new model for an online documentation portal in GitHub that was still very user-friendly, easy to navigate, and easy to update. MCLS IT hosts our documentation portal and provided me with relevant training in Markdown so that I could migrate the content from our PDF and update it in the future. Simultaneously, we worked with the support staff at the LOCKSS program, who were in the midst of documenting meta-archive during its ongoing sunset, to identify other processes and information we should be documenting, especially for our server hosts. That private documentation isn't available on our public-facing site, but templates for relevant items like our server information sheet will be included in our implementation toolkit. But our member-facing documentation is freely available on GitHub. Like all projects, we encountered some challenges along the way. First off, some key parts of the project just took longer than we expected. LOCKSS 2.0 experienced some development delays, recruiting server hosts, getting them to approve and sign SLAs, and getting hardware spec'd out and purchased took much longer than we expected, and Dart experienced an application-level failure during a routine update, which meant that it needed to be rebuilt using simpler, easier-to-update code. This resulted in a 1-year project extension on our IMLS grant to July of this year. We also felt that the grant goals emphasized technology over readiness training for members. If we could write our project narrative over again, we would definitely build in more robust readiness training. We also didn't provide server hosts enough training on LOCKSS basics. They knew how the software worked, but there wasn't anything we could point them to learn more about the system management piece. We also didn't go through robust enough training aimed at really pushing Dart to its limits. We quickly learned of some network connection issues that meant that we needed to limit the sizes of bags that could be pushed through to the staging server until Dart 3 was ready. And finally, a major bump in the road for us was the termination of our IMLS grant by the current administration in early April and the work stoppage order that went along with it. Working with MCLS's lawyer, gathering evidence in our support, while also going through the reporting process to close out our grant, took a lot of our time and emotional energy right when we should have been moving towards the finish line. But our effort paid off, and our grant was reinstated at the end of May, and the agency offered us a no-cost 8-month extension to accommodate the lost time. As with any good road trip, it's nice to balance looking back at the ground we've covered by looking ahead to see what's further down the road. We're continuing to collaborate with our friends at GinkoNet to share what we've learned and help them overcome some early hurdles, as other statewide networks did for us when we started this work. We will also continue to consult with and share resources with organizations and groups of collaborators hoping to start their own regional or statewide networks. If that sounds like you, don't hesitate to reach out. Most relevant to this presentation, a big lift over the next few months will be finalizing our implementation toolkit for public distribution. Look for announcements on various listservs or keep an eye on our website. And finally, we'll be hosting a symposium on March 26 to mark the end of our IMLS grant and the release of the implementation toolkit. That in-person event at the Library of Michigan is open to anyone, but in case you don't want to travel to Lansing in March, we'll also host a virtual presentation for the larger community. Thank you for your attention and support. I hope the resources and roadmap we shared are helpful and makes the digital preservation journey seem less daunting and scary. If you'd like to learn more about the MDPN and our efforts, please don't hesitate to contact me. My email and the MDPN's email are included here. Special thanks to the Institute for Museum and Library Services for their support of this project, and I look forward to hearing your questions.